Hello fellow humans and welcome to the Madhouse. I'm Josh and today I want to talk about reviews. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that books are kind of my thing. I read a shit ton of them and I really enjoy most of them. But sometimes I can feel a little bit scared to give reviews that are particularly negative. I don't know why I'm so hesitant to be negative about books, because if you know me in real life, you know I like to criticize things. I can be really critical. I love to give rants and all sorts of shit. In fact, you'll have seen some of them if you've been following this channel long enough. And if you haven't and you're new to this, subscribe now because my ego needs a boost. Perhaps I just don't really like putting negativity out into the world much nowadays. I did that for too long. I was angry and vitriolic and bitter, and I just don't have that anymore. And I'm kind of glad. Every now and again you come across a book or a film or a game and it's just shit, and you need to be able to say so. And I don't do that. So here's starting. I'm going to put that down before I burn myself. The Uncommon Reader by Bennett. You know, the guy who wrote History Boys and a whole bunch of other shit. He's a very accomplished playwright. The Uncommon Reader is about the Queen, that is to say, Elizabeth II, you know. The current Queen of the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia and a whole bunch of other places. 15 countries in total, actually. She discovers a love of reading, and it goes through the sort of stuff she's doing. She ends up reading a whole bunch of socialist literature and starting to question the nature of the monarchy. She starts abandoning her duties because she's so obsessed with books, and it was kind of funny. Or at least it was supposed to be. And pretty much all of the jokes just fell flat. It wasn't because it was somewhat critical of the Queen, because it largely wasn't. You end the book with a rather positive view of her, I believe. Maybe it was just too rushed, because it's a really tiny book. Maybe Bennett is only good at writing things when it comes to plays. He's excellent at monologues, but dialogue for a novel or a novella is clearly not his forte. While I'm all for people trying to diversify, some writers should just stick to what they're good at. And that is, in his case, the stage and screen, not the page. While I'm giving out negative reviews, because this is a lot more fun than I expected it to be, there is God's Own Country, which has been described as a Yorkshire version of Brokeback Mountain, but with less death, which is always a bonus. And it was interesting, kind of sweet, had a nicer ending, and was far more grounded in reality, at least as I experienced it. Obviously, I've never been a farmer who stayed up and shoved their arms up a cow's backside to help a calf be born. I've seen it happening, and that's part of the reason my parents never had to tell me about the birds and the bees, because I saw the cows demonstrating it often enough. But there was just something about it that didn't quite click. But for me, the love story felt almost a little bit forced. It wasn't particularly natural, and I don't mean the characters themselves, because that's part of their personality, but the way that it was pulled off from a storytelling perspective didn't quite mesh for me. There was no real soundtrack to speak of. The cinematography, while pretty, was nothing spectacular or groundbreaking. The story was adequate, but just not remarkable. It didn't wow me at all. Yes, it had some very graphic and intimate sex scenes, which you haven't seen in that level of detail in any film, straight or gay, for a long time. And it didn't feel pornographic in how that was executed. But sometimes it just felt somewhat excessive and detracted away from the intimate, emotional side of their relationship. Now, at the beginning that made sense, because one of the characters was not capable of emotional intimacy, only physical, and he grows to learn how to do that. But I don't believe they showed that very well through any of the tools of filmmaking. It was just, oh, this is apparently happening now, that is all. Having said that, I do... Shush. Having said that, I do reckon... I'll be back.
2,000 years later.
Right, sorry about that. I don't remember where I was. Got it now. With regards to God's Own Country, do go and see it, because it was an enjoyable film, yes. And as a piece of queer cinema, it's probably a lot better than the rating I've given to it. As it is, a lot of queer films tend to have terrible acting, and this one, the two leads did a magnificent job, especially when it came to the farming. There were no body doubles involved whatsoever. Everything you see on screen really happened. Perhaps you will find it more endearing than I did, but I have certain romantic tropes I like and dislike. So about a month ago, I went to the cinema to go and see The Dark Tower, an adaptation of one of the books, maybe a couple of them, in Stephen King's book series of the same name. It was a dreadful film. Sure, Matthew McConaughey was kind of fun as a villain, but largely the acting was kind of shit. Even Idris Elba didn't manage to save it. The story itself, while I'm sure King's books themselves are pretty good, the adaptation was just not. But mostly it just seemed exceedingly violent and unrealistic in how they went about it. Though it is refreshing to see a fantasy film where it's not all just swords and shields and spears and spells and all that. Special effects were even good, but it was poorly explained, poorly written, and just poorly executed. And if you want to watch any of the films that came out this summer, avoid that one. Go see The Hitman's Bodyguard, that was more fun. A couple of weeks ago, I went to go and see Kingsman: The Golden Circle, directed by Michael Vaughan, a sequel to, well, the other Kingsman film, which I enjoyed. The sequel, not so much. Sure, it was very funny, I laughed a lot through it, but it missed a lot of the charm of the first one. One of the things that held its appeal in the first film was this ordinary guy who doesn't have a silver spoon up his arse and becomes a super spy, overcoming the odds, defeating a really fun villain and saving the day and getting the girl, in a massive spoof of the Bond series. That I enjoyed. The sequel didn't really have those elements because, well, he's already the super spy. There are no real stakes that, ooh, is he going to become this, is he going to do it properly? Because we already know that he's a perfectly capable agent and that he's probably going to do it. Sure, does it capture the action sequences shot in a beautiful way, you know, with the really long cuts where you don't even notice the cut sometimes? It's incredibly subtly done, very clever. And the plot itself was actually quite interesting, and it made some rather illuminating political statements perhaps. But it was mostly just daft, bordering on sexist in a way that wasn't even funny compared as a spoof of the Bond films. It just didn't work. It felt clunky. The director, while exceptionally talented, had clearly exhausted whatever magic he poured into the original, and it just didn't work properly. Will I see it again? Probably. Will I even buy the DVD? Almost certainly. But it does not deserve the accolades the first one received. That's it, I suppose. This video was also a mess, because I don't really know what I'm doing with anything, but I suppose it could have been worse, and at least I've got a cup of tea. Until next time then, see you later and tatty byes. I need to dry off it.
Ohne dich hat der Regen keinen Tropfen. Ohne dich hat das Meer keine Flut. Ohne dich hat der Berg keinen Gipfel. Ohne dich ist mein Herz ohne Glut.